Hey, what's up everybody? I'm Maureen Wiley. I'm a professor of composition and I study learning science for fun. And today we're going to talk about the 4 wrong ways to study. Think about the ways you've been taught to study throughout elementary school and high school. A lot of it relies on rote memorization, where we take a bunch of information, we shove it into our brains, and we spit it back out onto an exam. And then the minute we walk out of the door, we forget everything we've ever learned. The reason for this is that rote memorization and skimming large amounts of information, which is what students are often doing when they're studying, does not encode the information into our long-term memories. This is the reason why you can take a class like AP Biology and prepare for your exams for months on end, and then as soon as the exam is over, you forget pretty much everything, except of course that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. The most common wrong way to study is by reviewing the information, by going over your lecture notes again and again, or rereading the information in the textbook. The actual problem is that when we're reading something over and over again, it sort of seems like an efficient way to study. In fact, this is the mental image that most people have when they think about studying, is pulling out their books, going over the information, looking at their lecture notes, reviewing the information without pausing to test themselves to find out whether or not that information is actually sinking in. The other reason this is a problem is because students aren't necessarily thinking about the meaning behind what they are reading when they're reviewing information. They're not testing that knowledge to see if they could apply it into a new situation or apply it to a new scenario, which is often what students are asked to do on exams. Exams don't require students to just memorize a bunch of information, particularly at the college level. A lot of times the exams are actually asking students to take this information that they need to know and understand and apply it to a new situation. In a math class, students don't just need to memorize the formulas, they need to be able to take those formulas and apply them to the variables that are present in the problem and then solve the equation. In a history class, students don't need to just memorize the names and dates and facts. They need to understand what were the motivating factors behind this war, or how did these factors contribute to the development of the Industrial Revolution. The key is that students need to understand the information and to be able to make meaning out of that information. And just rereading our textbooks and rereading our lecture notes doesn't actually accomplish that. On a related note, the second most common wrong way to study is by memorization through brute force. This is another one of the mental images that many of us have when it comes to studying, is constantly drilling ourselves to try to recall information and memorize key terms like the kinds you might see on a flashcard. One of the best ways to do that is to rely on our brain's most powerful technique for memorizing something, which is using visual imagery. And I talked about this in my video on how to use a memory palace, so make sure to check that out if you want to learn about how to use this technique when it comes to studying. But the gist of it is that visual images are much stickier in our brains. So if we want to learn something, rather than constantly, repeatedly drilling ourselves on that topic, we can actually improve our brain's ability to remember something by creating a visual image, and especially if we make that visual image something that's personalized and perhaps even somewhat surprising or unique or even disturbing in some way. So for example, let's say you have to remember the concept of photosynthesis. You can start with a visual image by thinking of, for example, the plants in your living room, but even better would be to make it personal and to imagine your friend being attacked by giant Venus fly traps, and your friend is in the middle of explaining the process of photosynthesis, which these plants are clearly not using because they're carnivores. If you need to remember the steps of a chemical reaction, you can have a friend or someone you know who loves science dressed as a scientist, moving through different rooms of your memory palace, performing different steps along the way, and bonus points if each of those steps leads to some kind of chemical reaction like an explosion or acid eating through the carpet, or beakers bubbling over with chemical solutions. That's actually going to help your brain to recall this information, and it can be pretty fun too. If you're studying in a group, you can even turn it into a game where you have one person give a concept and then several people have to draw a visual depiction of that concept. This is particularly useful for those of you who like to draw on your lecture notes, which in my personal opinion is one of the best ways to learn. The next way that a lot of students are studying incorrectly is by focusing their attention on the information that they already know super well. It makes a lot of sense that we want to start with the things that we're comfortable with because that can help to build our sense of accomplishment and our confidence, but it actually is detrimental to our ability to learn the information that represent the gaps in our knowledge. So the name of the game is something called active recall, which I mentioned in my lecture on how to take great notes. So go ahead and check that out if you want more information about how you can use the process of active recall when it comes to your note taking. But this is particularly helpful when it comes to preparing for an exam with a set amount of information that you have to know really well and understand really well in order to apply it. How this works is you can get out a blank piece of paper and then choose your topic and write down everything you know about this topic, everything that you can recall from your brain's long-term memory. Anything that might be missing, that's going to be the area where you want to focus your attention. That's also going to be the areas where you have the greatest potential for growth in terms of expanding your knowledge and your level of confidence on the subject before you head into the exam. If you want to be super hardcore about it, you can go back to your previous exams or homework assignments or any questions that you might have gotten wrong and focus your attention and energy on those problems. Identify where you went wrong in your thinking and use your brain's natural negativity bias to focus its attention on this one topic. Negativity bias means that you're going to pay more attention because you got this question wrong in the past. So your brain has kind of coded this information as something that's a bit of a threat, only in the sense of it might be a threat to your overall GPA, but that's going to mean that your brain is going to pay a lot more attention and be way more invested in understanding what went wrong before. A bonus tip is to use the power of artificial intelligence. Let's say you have a topic that you're focused on studying, input that into something like ChatGPT and ask it to quiz you on your knowledge. You can have a conversation about the topic where you go back and forth explaining different concepts and then being asked to clarify things that maybe you got wrong or were a little bit off. And at the end, you can even ask it to summarize what are the areas that you should focus on for future studying. Take a look at your textbook, see if there's any kind of like practice problems, and you can take one of those problems and input it into something like ChatGPT, take a look at its answer, and then ask it to explain how it got that answer. It'll provide you with a step-by-step explanation that can help you to identify where there might be some information gaps in your knowledge base. And finally, the fourth wrong way to study is to learn new information without the surrounding context. One of the ways to prevent this is to actually give your brain a task to perform while you are studying. I know it seems like studying is the task that you're doing, but you can give your brain a larger narrative to craft. For example, if you're reviewing information, have your brain look for what would be the bigger takeaways or the larger conclusions. If you're thinking about this body of information almost like a story, what would be the chapter title or subheadings that might be included in this information? And one of my favorite ways to learn information with context is actually to teach it to someone else. So I often suggest to my students that they imagine that they're writing their essay to someone else, and you can do this on an exam. Consider that you're filling out these questions as if you were explaining it to someone who's not familiar with these concepts, and how would you break it down for them in such a way that they would be able to follow along with this information without knowing anything about this topic as a background. So you can imagine someone in your life, but I actually recommend bringing this into your experience of taking the course by forming a study group and actually studying with other people. Use these techniques in a group setting to 10x your results and also make some friends along the way. A regular study group is an awesome low-stakes way to make some connections with new people. Like, for example, you can tell people, hey, I'm going to be in the library on Thursday afternoon from 1 to 3 p.m. and you can invite them to come join you for a study group where you can practice some of these techniques, like teaching each other some of the concepts. And worst case scenario, if nobody shows up, you have that time set aside to practice using some of these techniques to help you prepare for your exam and make sure that you're studying the right way. So let me know in the comments if you're planning on using any of these techniques in your next exam, and like and subscribe for more.